Doo-doo. Hello, 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 everybody. Happy Tuesday. We're at the exact end of February. It's kind of fun. It means that I'm 2 weeks out from a club meeting, if I even go to it. Oh man, what a week it has been, and it's only 2 days in. So, see here, what's new since last stream to give people a few minutes to get in. I moved a bunch of fish around. Um, and I'll probably talk about this a little bit, but I basically emptied a tank so that I can strip it down and rebuild it from the ground up. And then did a little bit of some really minor plant maintenance in a couple tanks, water changes, filter maintenance, a bunch of usual stuff. Nothing too crazy, other than moving fish. And let me tell you, uh, catching plecos is the bane of my existence. I'd actually rather chase rainbow fish than chase plecos. And rainbow fish, I would argue, are at times harder to catch because they're such fast fish and they're kind of slippery. Because they're not as like chunky, you know. They're big and tall, right? But they're not thick, wide, so they can get into spaces you thought maybe they couldn't get into, which can be really annoying, as was the case with one of the fish. So I'm going to tackle the topic a little. This probably won't be terribly long, but let me go into this. When I got back into this hobby in 2016, so 7 years ago at this point. Well, I guess if I think about when I actually restarted, it's probably more like 6.5 years ago, but still, closing in on 7 years. I originally thought, like, I'm only going to have a couple tanks, and I'm going to have these big mixed community tanks. Right? And then I started kind of diving in, and like any person who doesn't know how to control their hobbies, I went, like, neck deep and very quickly had multiple tanks, right? And the way I kept things, so, like, what has become my retirement tank was my primary display tank at the time. And it had a big mixed school of rainbow fish in it. And I had another 90-gallon tank that was another mixed school of rainbow fish, and a number of other tanks throughout my house that early on, one of the big things I tended to do outside of smaller, like, because for a while I had a rack of 10-gallon tanks. And just thinking about, like, the first room where I kept fish before I started expanding out and making it most of my house. um, I had the big display tank, the 90-gallon, a 29-gallon, and a rack with a bunch of 10s and some of my storage. Um, and that was all the tanks for the most part, except for, like, a 40-gallon breeder, and I think it was about a year into being back in the hobbies when I set the Guppy Mansion up. But until the Guppy Mansion, I, for the most part, kept my larger tanks as big mixed communities. I would very specifically mix lots of fish, and if I was breeding something, I would move the fry raising to a different tank, or potentially put adults in smaller tanks in order to be a breeding colony. And I did a lot of, like, guppies as breeders early on, and in the case of rainbow fish, got a little lucky in some of the babies that I had, where I was literally there watching things happen. So I could tell the only eggs that were on some plants or in an area So it was safer to move them because it was like very fresh. The plants had only been in there that's literally overnight. And that particular tank, everybody spawned in the morning if they were going to spawn. Now I look at that and I look back at that mentality where I was trying very hard to challenge myself constantly. I would purposely pick up combinations of things because I knew that, like, hey, this thing is hard, or getting reasonable fry yields out of this fish is tough. And an example I'll give you is the what we call either the rummy nose or koi guppy, right? Not the tuxedo ones; they're actually a little less brutal, but the ones that are just like white and red, right? Those are notorious for being fry eaters, and I specifically got a group from actually Corey of all people. It was a group that was Corey was trying to breed them, and he never had fry out of them. So I would specifically pick some of these things that were challenges after I started getting more comfortable with some of the other tanks, beyond like the tanks that I had in my room. Because at the time I also had the Flex here, and then a 20-gallon long over there, where I raised, like, over there in the 20-gallon long, it had a big Endler colony, along with some Mickey Mouse platties, because those don't really crossbreed. And then this has gone through a number of iterations as to what it kept, but this was never really a breeding tank. This is kind of like my personal enjoyment tank. But in tanks where I had mixed colonies, I kept lots of plants that were challenging. So I had some semblance of challenge kind of everywhere. And what this ended up being, and this was during a time where I had a lot more free time, right? I was not working nearly as much as I do nowadays, or especially just over the last like 5 years or so. I've really, the difference in what my work demands of me has really cranked up. So I had a lot more time for like maintenance, and that's where I did a lot of like plants for profit and stuff like that, because I had time constantly to be in tanks. And at one point, I was using aquarium plants to help pay bills around my house. I can remember this specifically when I was unemployed for a while when I got back into this hobby. Perfect time to pick up the aquarium hobby when you're unemployed, this expensive hobby. But I found out really fast kind of like what I could do well with plants and what I couldn't do well with plants. And so I had like a tank to challenge myself, and tanks specifically designed to grow plants. And I was selling plants like crazy. I remember this really specifically because there was about a 3-month stretch where just selling aquarium plants paid my power, water, and internet bills every month at my house. Which, you got to think, at that time I was up to 20 tanks kind of fast. So running 20 tanks, heaters and everything, lights all over the place, growing plants all over the place. You're selling a lot of plants, right? Wasn't too bad. But my hobby, as I got busier with work, and also as the more that I've chosen to do like YouTube, right, was influencing my free time. So I couldn't necessarily go as crazy with plants, but I still did anyway. I chose different, I guess you would say, attack vectors at being good at plants, as opposed to like going really crazy in super high maintenance things. I picked things that were more difficult that I could apply my expertise to. And I only did it in like 2 tanks. I basically only used 2 tanks to do all my plant stuff. And everywhere else where I had really crazy plants, I started changing them to mostly like crypts or Java ferns, Nymphea, a lot of like simplistic, easier to grow plants that didn't require stem level maintenance. Okay? And the more I did that, and like, of course, I'm 6 feet under deep levels of rainbow psycho at this point. And this is where I started getting groups of rainbow fish. You'll remember in the room where I had the rack with all the raising tanks, I had individual species tanks, and they were just growing out in these relatively bare, simplistic tanks. And that's when I started changing some of the tanks around my house, because the only other tank that was really just like one species of fish in my entire house was the guppy mansion. And so it was like, okay, I'm going to change. I've got this 40-gallon breeder over here. I got rid of some fish and decided I was going to stop breeding like this species of guppy, or I could move some things over to my display tank that steadily was turning into like my retirement tank, and start dedicating tanks to singular species. And when I started doing that with rainbow fish, it really changed the way that I appreciate things. Because, and I know this can't be a rainbow fish specific thing, because this behavior happened with my shell dweller tank. It happened when the Plants for Profit tank was basically only Kochu tetras. And it happened when the primary fish that I would ever pay attention to in the angelfish tank was only the angels. There was some maintenance crew type fish in there, but really the only thing in there that I really paid attention to, as far as like observed for pure enjoyment, was the angels. And the more that I had these singular species tanks, the more I found myself in a different level of appreciation. So I can think back to like when I was unemployed and I had that big display tank, and I literally had like, on my right hand side is this big 135 gallon, on my left hand side is a 90 gallon, and then across the room, and it's not a big room, mind you, but across the room is a little 29 gallon. And there's a little rack full of 10s, but these are the three kind of display tanks I'm looking at. 29 had some like guppies and stuff in it. Or no, it had a pork chop reservoirs. This is what it had, pork chop reservoirs for a while. And then I have two big mixed rainbow displays. And I had this recliner just sitting here. So if you were to imagine me sitting in my chair like this, two big display tanks here, and little tank over there that I had adopted from a person that was moving out of state. And I basically, all I did was rescape and replant it. Move the plants around, help them get a little healthier. But otherwise, I kept all the fish. And it was only the rasboras in there, really, except for like, I think a couple autocyclists and some snails or some shrimp, something like that. Nothing too crazy. But I used to just sit and like, I would kind of do this. I would just kind of keep looking around, and I would bounce from tank to tank in these big mixed displays, and I would kind of focus on one fish, and then I go look at, okay, my Bozeman eye's over here. Well, my Wanamensis is in that tank, and I got a big goldie-eyed Akai that I adopted over here in this tank. He's kind of fun. He's doing something. Oh, look, the rasboras are schooling around, and I was doing this. It was like a very ADHD attention thing. But the more I started getting singular tanks in a room, mind you, where it's one species, I would just focus not on a singular fish, but the whole tank. It became more about this small environment, the small slice of nature I had created, as opposed to the individual fish in the tank. And I noticed more and more, the deeper I get into the hobby, and the longer I do this, I far more appreciate a predominantly single species tank. Yeah, I put like maintenance crews and stuff like that. What we define as a maintenance crew. Like, I love autocyclists. I put them in pretty much every tank. I don't mind having snails in my tanks. I kind of choose different snails depending on the tank. A pleco here and there is perfectly fine, or like a Siamese algae eater, Florida flagfish, depending on what is in the tank. But I even look at, like, in my living room right now, right? There's the tank that's often behind me in a lot of my videos, where the the loaches are, and there's some rainbows in there. And I moved some extra rainbows in there over the weekend. I decided I'm making some other changes in the room where Fallen Forest is and where the Guppy Mansion is. There's the tank underneath my angelfish. I completely cleared that out, which it didn't have very much in there. It had like one rainbow left and a few plecos. So I moved the plecos to a different tank, and then took the rainbow fish in there and a couple rainbow fish in the tank beside it that had just kind of a mix group of rainbows, and moved all of them to the tank in the front room where the loaches are. And that's been kind of fun because now there's this new dynamic. Instead of only like 6 rainbows in the tank, now there's like 10, right? Added a few, and it's all males that got added. And for the most part, they're all just kind of doing their thing, sparring with each other because they got new friends to battleship with. But when I stare at that tank, I do the same thing I did back then. I focus on individual fish or what's happening in a bunch of plants with 1 or 2 fish and not the whole tank. But when I look at the Guppy Mansion or I look at the Running River tank, even though like Running River is not a singular species, there's both Equus corridoras and the Running River rainbows in there. But that's basically it. There's like 1 pleco and I think 1 Siamese algae eater in there. There's 2 species, but they're very divergent. It's not a mixture of rainbows. It's 1 big group of rainbows, 1 good group of corridoras. I don't focus on singular fish unless I'm really trying to get like a picture for myself, right? Like if my primary dominant male Running River is really fired up with color and I'm trying to get a picture, then I'll focus on that one guy. But otherwise, for the most part, I look at the whole tank, and I'm always looking at the entirety of the tank. And there is just something very different in that feeling that basically has dictated that now every time I set up a new tank, I really only want 1 species of something in there. You know, maybe you change it a little bit, like the Fallen Forest will have some autosynclus, some snails, and then just the one primary species in there. And then that's it. That's the only things going into that tank. Because the more I do tanks like this and I set them up, the more I end up appreciating the whole. Instead of seeing the forest for the trees, right? I see the forest. It's kind of like looking at the big picture, the big cinematic landscape instead of a portrait of photography. Does that make sense? And I wonder if you guys have any similar experiences where a way that you decided or slowly evolved the way you keep your fish completely changed and switched something in your head about how you appreciate those things in a way that to you is more appealing. Because to me, it is more appealing to appreciate that whole thing rather than focus. All right? Because my brain is very analytical. And often I prefer being focused on a singular thing for a while when I'm kind of zoning out and let my brain melt. That's why plant maintenance can be wonderful, because I can just focus on trimming, or I can just focus on cleaning out a filter. You know, whatever it may be, I can just focus on, in some of my pleco tanks, getting all the extra junk off the bottom of the tank, right? Things like that help alleviate stress for me. That hyper focus. But when I have these big mixed tanks, I'm kind of constantly bouncing. So it doesn't let me just focus in, if that makes sense. Because my eyes keep wanting to dart to something. But if I build this one tank that is 1 or 2 species, basically, and as long as those species are like completely different, then I end up appreciating the whole of the tank instead. And I'm curious because maybe for some people it's like, no, the more I mix species, I see these like really crazy behaviors, and that's more fun. Maybe you're like me and you're like, when I get like 15 mixed rainbows, I see one behavior. When I get 15 of the same species of rainbow, I see this very different behavior that to me feels way more natural and trying to mimic or accomplish some semblance of nature, and that's more enjoyable, right? Because like I can think of when I was a kid, I loved having like, okay, big group of tetras and big group of danios and big group of tiger barbs. Don't ask me why we did that, but it worked somehow. A little group of angelfish all in this big tank. So it's like this wild, crazy thing of action and color. But maybe it's as I get like an old man and my brain is like, simmer down, buddy. we need to de-stress more than we need to like just be like, ooh, 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 ooh. I don't know. So I think that's kind of why I'm saying like the way that I keep fish has changed, in the sense that the way that I appreciate my fish the most now is when I start doing something where, like even this tank is basically just 5 rainbows, 1 pleco, and a Siamese algae eater. And I'll sit every once in a while and just kind of, while I'm at work, if I've got a break, or if I'm kind of like, I need something to stare at a meeting while I'm thinking about something, I'll stare at this tank and just watch the rainbows kind of swim around. I just kind of was like, it feels great. Chills me out. I love it. So because of that, basically from here on out, every time I build a tank, it's not going to be some crazy, okay, here's 15 different species of rainbows. Like, I even watch, this might sound psycho to you guys, but I even watch videos online, and when I see people put together like these mixed rainbow tanks, I'm instantly like, oh, this tank could have been so much cooler if you just had one species. Like, okay, perfect example. MD Fish Tanks, which I love the guy. His energy is so infectious, right? He's been redoing, he's got his new studio, and he redid his kind of like Rainbow Peninsula thing. I even left a comment on the video just because I was like, one thing just in case, but he gave me a great answer. So, and it's a big mixture of rainbow fish, and it's like, yeah, they look great together, but to me, I'm like, do you know how much better it would be if it was all just one species, though? Their behavior would be so much different. It's just, that's how you know you're nitpicky, right? You've gotten so deep into your niche that you'll even look at how other people set up tanks, and you're like, oh, dude, if you could only know the joy of if you had done it this way. That sounds like a total stop thing. Probably is, but I don't know, man. That's how my brain fires. All right. After I get some water, chat, we'll go into Q&A. So if you do have questions, at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy. We'll kind of check out. We had a lot of cool comments. I want to come back to a few of them while I went on my long rant, but I have been talking a lot today because today at work has been crazy. All right, let me see here. I have a question from Leo that I'll handle in a second. Catch up. People talk to each other. Dr. Mads, good to see you. Other than on a very short timeline at work, which is a little stressful, I'm doing pretty good. Although, this whole return to office thing is kind of tech industry. They showed us how amazing life can be when you work from home, and then they're like, let's get you back into the office, and everybody's like, don't wanna. Legion Aquatics. I was wondering if it's possible to keep live food with fish in the tank so the fish have a constant food supply without fish eating all of them and destroying the population. The best way that I've ever seen this accomplished, and or been given suggestions, usually involves a sump, so that you have effectively a refugium for your live food. And then every once in a while, they just kind of like make their way out of the sump up into the tank. Or a trick that I learned from Preston John, who I saw was in chat. Specifically, this is some like voodoo witchcraft he's learned with scuds, is he would take fresh, coarse sponge filters, not super coarse, but think like the Hydro 5s, whatever they are. I think it's the API that makes those. They used to be super common, and they're like the ones you get from Gemco, if you guys know Gemco really well. And he would put just the sponges in tanks, let them get soaked, and the scuds would populate these things. And then he would just pick a sponge up and move it into a tank where he wanted it, and they'll slowly make their way out of the sponge because that's their little safe place into the water column, and then the other fish can just like hunt the scuds down. And then he just takes the other sponge he'd used previously and puts it back in the scud colony and lets it get repopulated. It's like 2,000 level IQ stuff. Just genius. I remember when he described that to me, and I was like, that's too smart. That's too smart for my poor brain. And yet so simple, right? Like, but there's ways to do it. It's just tough because, especially if you have fish that have like bottomless pits for stomachs, like rainbows, in the tank itself becomes extremely difficult. Most of what I see is people that keep populations in like a separate tank or two. They'll have like a rack where it's like, these are all the live foods. I do baby brine shrimp, and I've got my different worm colonies down here, and I've got vinegar eels all the way at the bottom to keep them out of the light, and XYZ, right? And they basically have like the live food station. And they might have some tanks that are some other colonies. I've seen a lot of people do various different things. It's very interesting. Successful breeder to successful breeder who is very good at live food, the way they do things. Like one guy I used to know before he moved out of the state, a gentleman named Jay. He's pretty fantastic. He had a 55-gallon like barrel drum that he had one at each end of his like fish room basically. And those were his 2 Daphnia colonies because he was a big cichlid guy. So that's where like my first Shelly colony came from, was from Jay. And, he was just constantly feeding Daphnia. And basically didn't really need to feed almost anything else because he kept such good Daphnia colonies. Just thoughts there. I mean, if you're really trying to do it crazy, you could have a system kind of like what Lucas has shown, like with his fry systems where they're interconnected, and there's a big sump down below that acts as the filter for everything, and have the primary live colony trying to live in there with no other fish. And then having the water just naturally feed up with those live foods in them. Might be a way. Okay. Nabokov man, if this is going where I think it's going, I very much agree. I have 2 tanks for 2 species, don't need much. Get a pretty big horde of corridors in a tank by themselves, and it will change how you view the fish. Just a cleanup fish or a bottom feeder. Oh, I totally don't see mine as like a cleanup fish. Especially like with Equus Corries, because they swim mid-water column so much. And so do Brain. Not Duplicarius, the other one. Adolphoi. Geez, the Brain. Adolphoi corridor is also like go mid-water quite a lot. The more that I see the corridors that like to like go up mid-water and swim with other fish, the more that I appreciate those Corries far more than like Aeneas and some of the others, like the ones that really stick down to the bottom, stir-by, stuff like that. Although I've seen stir-by that in a like 75-gallon where it was just stir-by, and that tank was wild. It's a guy who breeds them regularly in my club. And I was just like, oh yeah, this is my main stir-by colony. I was like, is there anything else in here? He's like, no. Well, that's not true. There's one, and it was like one little bitty autosynclus. And it was like, yeah, sorry, there's one other fish in there. It's all corridors. It's fun, yeah. I think the more that you have a single fish, the more you see behaviors you would otherwise not normally see. And it becomes really, really enjoyable. Pony Girl apparently is like me, starting to move to species only. Yeah. John Ebson, good to see you, John. How you doing, buddy? I'm definitely moving towards a single species tank, or tanks. Sorry, single species tanks. It would never be just one tank for you. I think that would be impossible. My favorite tank is just a horde of dwarf chain loaches. Oh man, loaches are such like I've really come to appreciate dojo loaches, but they both give me heart attacks and joy at the same time. Oh, there's chat jumping, letting me know I'm behind. Thanks, chat. Preston John, speak of the devil. The American puffer god himself. That's what I'm calling you forever. You're just gonna have to deal with that, Preston. One of my sump ponds has like 1,500 CPDs, and their behavior is amazing. Even the puffers just sit in the plants and watch them. This is why when you say things like that, Preston, I want you to know this is why my coworker who moved down to Arizona, he moved down to the Tempe area, is like, dude, you should totally move down here, blah blah blah. And I'm like, I don't really know any fish. Well, never mind. I do know a fish person down there. I do know an Arizonan fish person, and that might be cool. Okay, Leo, let me get to your question. So, getting the 60 breeder tank set up Monday. You went with the 60 instead of the 75. Leo was posting in the members Discord because ye dollar per gallon / half off sale has returned. Debating if 2 sponge filters with a co-op air pump or running either a Space Eco, so that's the Seche, or a Tidal. It really depends on what you're trying to put in there. I mean, if you're not terribly worried, if you're going to put a good amount of plants in there and you want some good flow, then that rules out the sponges kind of immediately. If you don't necessarily care about flow, and you know you're going to have plenty of bio capacity because of plants and things like that, then sponges are fine, and they keep things oxygenated. The Tidal, I would say, as long as you're keeping your water levels high, the Tidal's freaking amazing, right? If you work a ton in the week and your water levels go down and it starts making obnoxious noises, then you might be looking at the Tidal going like, that stupid skimmer, friggin' like I do. Sometimes when I'm like trying to eat dinner with my wife and I can hear one of my tanks, the one that's most notorious for doing this, is just like starting to make noise, and I'm like, yeah, all right, gotta do a water change right now. Finish dinner and then do a water change immediately, or that's gonna drive me crazy. As far as the Seche Eco, I mean, I don't have hands-on knowledge of it, but a bunch of people like it. It's a canister. I would argue that as long as you keep your water levels higher, you're probably better off with the Tidal as far as easy maintenance. Canisters are their own special beasts when it comes to maintenance. If you're trying to do maintenance less often, then that would argue a canister. And this both assumes that you want slightly higher flow rates than you would if you had sponges. If you don't care about the flow rates, you want to keep your cost of your tank down a little bit, go with sponges. And just have a decent plant load in there and you're okay. You have options, it's just about how you want to approach it. There isn't a best in this. There's an opinion, and that's it. There's no singular answer, right? There's 11 solutions to your problem. The question is, which solution do you want to use? RD Red. I've given up neon tetras. My LFS cannot get decent stock. Oh yeah, dude. I basically have neons and cardinals. I've decided I'm just not going to try to keep them anymore because I'm terrible at them. Even when I get them from good stock, I'm not very great with them. So it's rainbow fish all the way, man. those are my neon tetras now. It's rainbows, more rainbows. Is it safe to keep a puffer tank without a lid? Well, you got Preston John in chat. I would ask that guy. He knows better than anybody. My instinct says yes, but I am not the supreme deity of puffers. I'm just a rainbow fish moron. Let's see here. Jorge, does high pH affect the plant's ability to use liquid fertilizer? I saw a video about that and I lowered my pH. My plants are doing so much better. So, okay. Yes, and I can't really give you the super sciencey answer, but the simple part of this is the higher the mineral content gets and the more alkaline the water becomes, it makes it more difficult for the plants to absorb nutrients from the water column. A majority of plants, there are very few exceptions, do significantly better in softer and or more acidic water when it comes to being a water column feeder. This is a little different with root feeders, but in general, that same, I don't want to say rule, but just like understanding applies. In general, plants prefer soft water. There are some minor exceptions to that rule. But yeah. Funny girl, I really like my titles, except for the 35 needs longer intake IMO. Well, the 35 is built like a completely different filter, which is kind of weird, right? It's, you know, it's not like the aqua clears where they just get a smaller body, but everything else is exactly the same in the sense of design. Like the pump gets smaller, the parts get smaller, sure, but the whole way it functions is the same. Where the Title 35 is basically just the skimmer unit, no intake tube whatsoever, which to be fair, like even on the bigger titles, it's something like 70+% of their water flow is entirely on the skimmer. That skimmer does most of the work. Very little water is coming from your intake tube. And that's part of the problem, depending on your opinion, with the title. Brian Radovich, did anyone have suggestions for a high flow filter for a 40 breeder looking to breed autosynclus and pitbull plecos? Ooh, honestly, like I've had really good success putting things like an AquaClear 110 or a Tidal 110 on a 40 breeder and just having it at max flow. You could also use something like the 407, an Awase canister. You'd want to go up to like the Biomaster 350 or larger. Anything that can give you flow rates, we'll put this in big quotation marks, close to around that 400 gallon per hour mark, that's giving you 10x. And at 10x, you're at a pretty good flow rate. Anything like crazier than that, now you're looking at like river system, some real hardcore stuff, and you don't necessarily need that insane flow. You can do it, don't get me wrong, but you probably don't need that much. Like I had zebra plecos for the longest time with basically just like a Tidal 110 doing all the work for them, and they loved the flow rate out of that thing. Absolutely loved it. And I just kept it at max. It was just churning water in that tank, and they were just loving the flow. Nabokov fans like punching the Title 35 down even more. Yeah, I didn't say it's the only problem. I'm just saying like its design is way different. It's the one title that I think you shouldn't include in the same like ratings category just because the designs the way they save space on that design causes more problems than I think it helps. John Herman, what would be your max intensity on a Fluval Plant 3.0 for a lightly planted 20-gallon long? Okay. It depends very heavily on the type of plants we're using. So if we're using mostly like Anubias, Java Fern, all these like low light requirement plants, then I would be looking at something like only 35 or 40%. And I would start, especially if it's a brand new tank. Now, if it's an existing tank, that's where I'd start. And I'd make some small adjustments based on what I saw. If I start seeing a little bit more glass algae showing up, I'm going to dial it down a little bit. Pull it down an extra 10%. If I'm seeing something where like, the plants aren't quite as happy as I want, I'm just going to dial it up a touch. I'm going to bring it up like 5%. I'm going to bring the light down faster than I would put it up when I'm tinkering. But don't be afraid to tinker. That's the thing. All my settings are basically just a baseline. They're a baseline that comes from some dummy on the internet who monkeyed around a lot. The big thing is accounting for the differences in the plants that you're keeping and your own like local conditions. because my water is different than your water, blah, 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 all the usuals that we know about keeping fish and plants and all that kind of things in a glass box. So we use it as a baseline, and we get ready, you watch it for like a week or two, and if it looks great after 2 weeks, don't change it. Watch it for 2 more weeks. Then after if that combined time, now that we're in a month, now we're starting to see something weird happen, then we make a little adjustment. If it still looks great, guess what? We're where we need to be, and we keep watching it until we see something happen. And then we start diagnosing whether maybe it's a light related issue, maybe it's something else. Have I not been doing my water changes frequently enough, or have I not been fertilizing as regular as I used to be? Whatever those things, we ask those questions of ourselves to help figure out our problem so we can rectify it. The nice thing about most planet tanks is they take some time, and they will be relatively forgiving. So we can do small tinkers and mess with things over a period of time and see a good effect in the long run, as long as we are patient. And the big thing is us being patient. When we get impatient, that's when stuff goes real haywire. Hope that helps, John. Omar, good to see you. I'm not 100% sure, but I bet the type of buffer can affect nutrient absorption rate in the case of plants. Yeah, that would be a really interesting test if somebody were to take different types of KH buffers, because there's a number of different ways you could buffer your tank, right? And compare, if only the buffer is what's changing, how things occur. That'd be very interesting. James Holbrook, I use Pilo moss, nice, in my Neocaridina shrimp tanks. Ooh, Neocaridinas. That means you're way better at this than I could possibly be, because you're keeping shrimp alive. The moss grows a lot faster than Java moss in my water. Should I just start selling the offset, the quicker growth? To offset the quicker growth, let me English that better. Even that statement is terrible, right? Or just toss it away. If you have the ability to sell it, absolutely sell it. Because think about it this way, that great moss growth can basically pay for your shrimp food, right? Use those things. Don't be afraid to sell some plants if it helps you. I mean, even if it's if you got a local fish store that's willing to take your moss in and just give you store credit so that you can use it on whatever the heck you want. Bingo. Because it's going to grow no matter what. Now, if you don't have a way to sell stuff and you just want to toss it, just when you do your trimmings, don't be afraid to let it go. You can compost it. It won't hurt you. Got another tank that's brand new? Seed it with a little moss. It'll be all right. As you're doing stuff, just assess each time you need to trim. Personally, when I have the opportunity to, I always try to sell or trade plants. I'm always looking for some way, or I'll also give it away, but that's mostly because I have enough people in my club that if all else fails and I have the spare time, I'm usually happy to give plants to people that need them. Because there's a lot of crazies in my club, and we love our plants. It's like a drug. One would argue it might be more expensive. Oh man. Brian, yeah, I hate to refer to any tank as Thunderdome, but that's kind of what I have. The survivors are now potential breeding stock to populate other tanks with. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, man. Leo209. That 60 breeder will have the spotted Congo puffer and a group of Corridoras. Okay. I would have a small concern about the Corries trying to go after the food, but they'll learn. They'll learn that the puffer is big and scary. I put that in quotation marks because most puffers are really kind of just little puppy dogs and not really that aggressive, except for those red-eye puffers. Those guys are jerks, but most of them are pretty chill. Legion Aquatics. Did I answer your question? I was at dinner. I think so. I have to scroll back through chat. I'm pretty confident I saw your question and answered it. Fast way. Oh, yes. Live food. Yes, I did. I answered your question while you went away. I made you run away my ranting about how I keep fish, and then I answered your question while you were away enjoying dinner. It's all a plan just for you, Legion Aquatics. Oh, man. Brandon, how would you go about selling rhizomes like crypts? Crypts are a rosette, not a rhizome. But I get what you mean. So, you have pink flamingo that's gotten huge with a bunch of runners branching off. Cool. I sell crypts really regularly. But nowadays, I've gotten lazy and I wait for larger events locally. An example would be Fishtoberfest. I took a ton of crypts to Fishtoberfest to sell. So what I try to do is I always try to make it something that is a good deal for people buying from me. That's a personal long day. Don't worry about it. I'm having a little fun. Don't worry, Brandon. You're good. You're good. So a personal policy of mine is I always want something to be a really great deal. I'm not necessarily trying to optimize the amount of money I make from things. I want something to be like my philosophy on selling plants. It could be summarized like this. I want to make the deal so good, my customers feel like they would be stupid to not buy that from me. So an example would be, I was selling gallon bags packed full of Java Fern for $10 the last time I sold plants. At least 7 good starter plants in there. When I do crypts, I try to have at least 3 reasonably healthy plants, unless it's a really rare crypt that you don't have very many of. And then I just want a very good healthy plant in there. I want strong roots. I want at least this much root system on there, right? And I want several good healthy leaves. I'm not going to sell the teeny tiny babies. I'll keep the teeny tiny babies and grow them back out. I'm fine with that. I want to make sure that every time I sell something to someone, they know that 1, it's grown submerged, so you don't have to convert it. It has a healthy root system, and the way that I price it, you would be bonkers to try and buy it anywhere else. So an example, pink flamingo. This is kind of a chase plant. It's kind of expensive. But part of the expense is a lot of times because it's difficult to get it stable because it comes in from the farms, grown immersed. And that transition is really hard for that particular plant because it's a big genetic defect monkey, is basically what it comes down to, right? It's a giant ball of defective genetics that make that pink color. So if you can offer somebody a single nice healthy plant with several big, clean, robust leaves and a good root system for the same price or preferably less than what a potted plant costs them, you're already giving them a deal. Now, think about it this way. The way that I would approach that is if normally I see, I'm just going to give an example, a pot of pink flamingo for $15 and that pot is 1 plant. Then my goal would be sell 2 plants for $10. When I sell plants, I want my deals to be ludicrously good in favor of the person buying the plants. Now you might think to yourself, why? I put in all this work, Bentley. I should get rewarded for it. If you start building a reputation as that person that when you go buy plants from Brandon, you are always going to get an amazing deal on very healthy plants. These first couple people that you sold plants to will tell their other friends. And their other friends will come to you. And over time, you can sell more than just the pink flamingo. You can sell whatever plant you want to sell or need to thin out. Now, granted, the more demand a plant has, in theory, you can go a little higher up, right? if it's really hard to find a plant, or a plant is particularly fussy, you're going to find those collectors that are willing to pay more. And what you need to ask yourself, Brandon, is just this. What's the right balance between how hard it is to find that plant in your area and keep it stable? Because especially pink flamingo, that plant is such a prissy child of a plant. It melts on you so easy. So it is work to get it happy, right? What's the right balance that says, yes, this is the right level of reward for me to consider selling that plant. Plus, give somebody a great deal to a point of where they would, the next time I'm selling plants and they see my name, they're immediately going to go, dude, that guy gave me a great deal. I want to go see what he's selling. Right? Because to me, from a deep perspective of having worked in the marketing industry at one point, your reputation is worth way more than anything else. So if you build a rapport with customers, especially if you want to play the plants for profit game, like really hardcore, when I was selling, when I was literally paying multiple bills of my house, and I'm talking like I was selling a slow month for me when I was doing plants for profit really, really aggressively was $400 in plant sales. No joke. I would sell a ton of plants when I had the time to do it really crazy. That was a slow month. That was the middle of summer when less people are out there doing fish stuff. They want to be out in the nice weather and enjoying things. Those are my slow months. A big reason why is I gained a lot of reputation. It wasn't about being the cheapest. It was about providing the absolute best value for money. Because if you do that, and especially if you're willing to give somebody your contact information so that if they have troubles or they have questions, you're willing to help them out a little bit here and there. You get people like I used to have this gal who kept goldfish and koi. She would come buy plants from me to feed to her fish. And then she had one planted tank where she would buy some extra plants only for that tank. And she would, every time she came through once a month. She would always kind of like tour a few of the tanks that I have in the house. And she would look at, okay, what would be a good plant for me to try in my planted tank versus feed to my fish? And I would just walk her through the different stuff. And I'd be totally straight up with her. Like, hey, this plant, pretty finicky. I don't know if I would try that quite yet. Get a little more experience with something like this. I provided value and service. And it resulted in a lot of sales. That's how I approach plants. I'm kind of a crazy person, which is why you will probably never see me do this as an actual business. Because I'm pretty sure the way that I do it actually isn't profitable. So maybe don't take my advice, but my philosophy might be good. You just might have to tweak it a touch for yourself. Let's see here. Apparently has the Java fern market on lockdown. Only some. Shade aquatic breeder. I feel like stuff like that's partially why it's so hard to have an actual fish business in the USA. You know what? I actually don't think it's hard to have a fish business in the USA. Assuming that you have... The problem is having the capital to start it up correctly. I think you can look at folks like Dan's Fish, even my friend Redfish Bluefish, right? If you find the right wheelhouse to sit in, and more importantly, you provide amazing service. Look, Aquarium Co-op is the gold standard of showing you what a fish business can become if you are exceptional at your customer service. There are so many things where you literally just know they will take care of me if something goes wrong. Dan's Fish is very similar, right? They will take care of you if something goes wrong. They do a ton of things to ensure that the likelihood of something going wrong is extremely low. But in those events, you know, they're going to take care of you. And that is why those businesses do well. It is very possible to have a fish or aquatic plant business. There are lots of lessons to learn. In talking to a number of my friends who have gone into small businesses in the fish industry in some way, shape, or form, they learned some hard lessons. But as long as you learn from where you make your mistakes and you understand that you are going to have customers that might be a pain in the butt. But as long as you're willing to go the extra mile for them, you will find success. You really will. Because the big thing about this particular hobby is when people know that you take care of them and that you do things for the right reason. Look at the difference between Dan's Fish and what most commonly happens in the chain of fish making it to your local fish store. Are things a little more expensive? From Dan. They can be, yes. But you know that they've gone through quarantine. They've been well taken care of. The fish are eating well. They're very healthy. They individually package fish when they ship them to you to maximize survival rates. Even when the worst occurs, they have had fish survive what seems nigh impossible because of the steps they take to take care of the fish and at the same time take care of us as customers, right? When a business gains a reputation for doing that, they will be successful. As long as they stick to that principle of doing that. It is absolutely possible to have a successful fish business, even in the United States, where the U.S. can be a bear, an absolute bear. But I think the big thing is a majority of the businesses that don't do well lose sight of the most important part of the fish business. Your customers. The second that you look at a customer as a problem, or you take a more antagonistic approach with them, even when they're being a pain, right? Yeah, you're going to have to put some things in place that help protect you. Like how your live arrival guarantees work and things like that when it comes to fish. But if you do it right and you take care of people and you're honest, you're not trying to be shady, you're not trying to hide things, you're just upfront and honest with people, that will build a reputation that is worth way more than advertising or getting some like dum-dum on the internet like me to be like, this is the greatest person ever. No one cares about that. But when every person, you know, if Alley Cat and Leo 209 and James and Tom H, and Mike Stanbaugh, all these people in chat, everybody goes, oh yeah, I've bought fish from him. He's amazing. He does X, Y, Z. Or yeah, that's the guy that is the best person to get these fish from. And he does all this to make sure that everything goes great. You will find success. The hardest part is starting up and keeping a commitment to that level of service, because it's hard. It is very hard. You're going to have days where you're like, I swear this guy will not get off my back. And you have to realize that every once in a while you're going to get a customer like that. and you still have to treat them as well as you treat your best customers, who are people like me, where like if something ends up late or you're out of stock, or it's like, hey, can you try and make sure you got a good male female balance, and like you're like, I'll do my best. I'm not really good at sexing rainbow fish, Bentley, and you send me fish, and I'm like, dude, I got 15 males and 2 females. This is gonna be a nightmare for me. But it's all right. You tried your best. That's all I care about. I'll figure it out. Right? You're gonna have the people like me who are like super chill about stuff, and then you're gonna have the people who are like, how dare you? You promised me, and you're like, I said I'd try my best. Oh, you swore to me you're gonna get those people. You just are. And as long as you're willing to commit to making it right in some way, shape, or form, not by killing yourself, mind you, you're going to have things in place to protect yourself a little bit. But as long as you do your best to treat every customer like they're one of your best friends in the in fish world, right? They're like that guy next door who you learn super secrets from, you'll be all right. I know. Crazy rant on that, but it's what we do, right? That's kind of the nature of me. I just rant on things. Alley Cat finally made it at the end. Good to see you, Alley. Been a while. It's been a little bit, hasn't it? I don't think I've seen you in stream for like 2 months. Atkins Nature Aquarium's got his holy grail, the Rosen Maiden Crypt, from me. At the Fish so fresh. Now you have a carpeting, dude. It's so. Have you gotten to the point? You might be close to the point where you can get 6 or 7 flower spaces all at the same time. It usually only happens in about the middle of summer. But when like multiple plants are all flowering at the same time, it's like, cool. Because the Rosen Maidens do that, and it just feels so good. It feels so good when that happens. All right, I'm going to try and like jam through a couple quick questions. I went on some long rants. I'm sorry. I have opinions, and I'm talkative. Legion Aquatics. I set up my 10-gallon with crypts only and some floating Salvinia using a co-op light, co-op root tabs. How long do you think it will be take tank fill in like your Fluval Flex? It depends on the particular crypts, and realistically, you have to find that sweet spot. Once you find that sweet spot just about right, when they start chaining off, they will go pretty fast, and it's pretty amazing. This, I think, took me like... I went through a couple of melts where they were like, I'm very angry, whoomp to like half their size, and slowly came back, and bomb again, and was like, stupid crypts. But that's the nature of crypts, right? That happens. To get it filled in about like this, realistically, it was about like 6 to 9 months. And these are all easier crypts. I mean, there's some weird stuff in here too, don't get me wrong, but most of them are like a lot of your Wet and Daddy Eyes, where they'll grow pretty prolific when they're happy. Hell, roughly that long. Oh, good. My memory still sort of works. That's nice to know. Yes. And you got them to flower all at the same time. Dude, it's so wild when that happens. When you're just like, oh my, I got a cryptoflower underwater. Oh, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden, 2 days later, it's like, oh, this one flower space is huge. And then you see like 3 or 4 more starting to pop up, and you're just like, I don't know what's happening, but all these plants are very happy. And that feels so nice. It's just such a good time, dude. It's so good. I'm glad you got to experience that. Alley Cat, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I just like, shipped her in from out of the country and all of a sudden got married. We've been together for a while, but yeah, it was very nice. He kept it together very well. I will say this, like, this will be my last little thing. And thank you for all the people who say they love my laugh. I sometimes feel like I'm a total doofus when I laugh, but I don't care. My brain went out the window. Oh, one of my best friends, when he got married, his now wife, but his bride at the time, the music starts and she's at the end of the aisles just starting her walk, and she just like broke down. like absolutely fell apart. And it was kind of adorable, right? Because, you know, she's got she's surrounded by loved ones, and there's a bunch of us doing the bridal march on little plastic kazoos, because that was the doofy thing that the brother who was conducting the ceremony wanted to do, because he knew it would make her laugh, but she was just like laughing and crying, very happy, right, of course, but just completely broke down. Where when we did our short ceremony, I imagine during like when we do the proper ceremony later, where it's I can get all the family and stuff there properly, um, that might be different. But she held together quite well. She didn't fall completely apart. She only cried a little bit, but it was it was lovely. It was nice to be surrounded by what little family we're allowed to have in the courtroom, because they still have COVID policies, and you know, slap this thing. Which, by the way, getting married, I've heard is supposed to be great for your taxes. I'm getting like absolutely kicked in the teeth in my taxes this year. Yeah. I hope you the rest of you are in better shape than me when it comes to taxes this year, because I I sitting there looking at it. I'm like, I might get like $75 back. Sweet. And I take zero deduction, so I make them take the maximum amount of taxes out of my paycheck possible. Ugh. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. All right, gang. We're gonna talk about this, where next week we'll be doing another live stream. I haven't decided if 2 weeks from now I'm gonna go to my club meeting, but next week definitely we'll have one. Bentley, did you give up on the flex filtration and just use a sponge filter? No, the pump, like the pump is having some issues in there. It like sometimes dies and sometimes works. So I just had the sponge in there as a like short term fix. Long term, really what's going to happen is I'm going to tear the flex down, and probably have some different tank either here or change some of the stuff that's in this area. But that's probably several months down the line. So for right now, it's just the sponge is really just there to move water. The plants do more of the work, to be honest. There's not really very many fish in there in the first place. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here, putting up with my crazy random rants, going off on like how to run a fish business or other things. I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your week. As always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.